December 1983. The crowd explodes as Jimmy Page steps into the stage at Madison Square Garden, his first appearance on an American stage in 6 years. 6 nights here in June 1977, and then silence. This wasn't just anticipation, it was a full circle moment, the final shows of the A.R.M.S tour, and in a strange twist, Page walks out wearing the same long jacket from his last US performance, July 1977, with Led Zeppelin, from a troubled stadium ending to a hopeful return indoors. For many, it felt like picking up a story that had been left unfinished since 1980, but this wasn't a solo comeback. Standing beside him were 2 other giants of British rock, Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck. 3 former Yardbirds, 1 stage. And they weren't here for nostalgia, they were here for a friend, fighting for his life. But this night didn't begin in New York City, and it didn't begin in 1983. It ends with all the musicians on stage, thanking the audience, a moment of camaraderie, far removed from competition and rivalries, returning to the spirit that first ignited their journeys. And among all the names on that stage is where our story truly begins. A man who got a little help from his friends, Ronnie Lane. His influence quietly runs through the entire history of British rock. As a founding member of the Small Faces, his career quickly blossomed as a bass player and backing vocalist. Their 1966 debut was greatly influential for many future British stars, including Robert Plant, who, like many singers of his generation, was never shy about his enormous respect for Steve Marriott. The Small Faces concert schedule reflected their success. 237 shows in 1966 alone put them in trailblazing mode across the UK and Europe. They became a household name, and every musician in London, including Clapton, Beck, and Page, came to know them. But things don't last forever. Steve Marriott quit on New Year's Eve 1968. Ronnie Lane then helped form Faces alongside Rod Stewart and Ronnie Wood from the Jeff Beck group, joined by future Who drummer Kenny Jones. 4 albums and many world tours later, the band dissolved by 1975. Lane went solo with a good sense of humor as Ronnie Lane's Slim Chance, but his health slowly began to show concerning symptoms that were finally diagnosed in 1977. Multiple sclerosis, a progressive neurological disease that affects movement and coordination. Despite this, he closed the decade with the Pete Townsend collaboration Rough Mix, followed by See Me, which featured a guest appearance by Eric Clapton. Lane wasn't just a bassist people admired, he also helped enable some of the most important recordings of the 1970s through his famous mobile studio, which captured historic projects like Clapton's Rainbow Concert, Rick Wakeman's Journey to the Center of the Earth, The Who's Quadrophenia, Bad Company's first 2 albums, and even parts of Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti, to name a few. Here's Ronnie on the same stage as John Bonham, Jimmy Page, Keith Moon, and Roy Harper. There's also the 1979 Rockestra Ensemble, with the man himself, led by Paul McCartney. To know Ronnie Lane was to know rock and roll. Enter 1983. Ronnie Lane's girlfriend, Boo Oldfield, began exploring the idea of organizing a concert to raise funds for A.R.M.S, Action into Research for Multiple Sclerosis. This would not just be another charity show. The illness had touched their lives directly, and the idea was simple: rock and roll and goodwill joining forces for a greater cause. Ronnie Lane was only 37 years old. Boo Oldfield reached out to producer Glyn Johns, a man who seemed to know every major name in British rock. At the time, Johns was already working with Eric Clapton for an upcoming appearance at the Prince Trust Benefit Concert, scheduled for September 21st, 1983 at London's Royal Albert Hall. So Eric was in, and the solution quickly emerged. Since his band's gear would already be set up at the venue, why not add another date? An additional concert would take place the night before, September 20th, under the banner of the A.R.M.S benefit show, through famous promoter Harvey Goldsmith, whose resume included concerts for Kampuchea 1979, the Zeppelin's tour over Europe 1980, The Who 1981, and David Bowie's Serious Moonlight. Clapton had already played several British dates earlier in May, so there was an idea to make the A.R.M.S event extra special. While there was no doubt he could draw a large audience on his own, they took cue from the 1982 Prince Trust Benefit Concert featuring the likes of Gary Brooker, Phil Collins, Pete Townsend, Kate Bush, and Robert Plant, culminating in an all-star jam at the end of the show. So the question became, how could Eric Clapton top this? Invitations were sent for 2 more legendary guitarists to join him. By 1983, Clapton was on a roll, riding the tail end of a comeback that began in 1977 with Slow Hand. He had become the man who sang Cocaine and Wonderful Tonight to an entirely new generation of fans. His 1980 live album had been a double vinyl success, reinforcing Clapton's place in the new decade without sacrificing his signature blues style and jackets and Fender Stratocasters. Throughout 1982, he toured the world supporting Another Ticket. The album had been recorded in the Bahamas at Compass Point Studios, the same place where Emerson, Lake and Palmer recorded Love Beach, and you can check my documentary here on the channel. So when Clapton returned there to begin work on his next record, a personal transformation was underway. After entering rehab for alcoholism, he was determined to rebuild his life. As he later joked, the only things he still had around him were money and cigarettes, which became the title of the new album. Money and Cigarettes was released in January 1983, and the cover reminds me of Robert Plant's Pictures at 11 for some reason. Although it did not reach the heights of some earlier releases, it still charted in the Billboard Top 20, and the promotional tour was extensive. From February through July 1983, the Eric Clapton Band remained in heavy demand, performing 68 shows across North America, the UK, and Europe. Clapton took a break from the road past their American tour finale on July 17th in Colorado, a well-deserved vacation to recharge in time for September. The question remained, who would join him on stage for the A.R.M.S show? The promoter and staff didn't have to look far away. Everyone agreed on Jeff Beck.
It's controlled lunacy, what we're doing now.
It was not the first time they would play a charity event, as they both played on the Secret Policeman's Ball, 3rd edition, in September 1981, an Amnesty International fundraiser ongoing series that included Monty Python. A rare 1982 vinyl was released, with top-notch performances by Sting, Phil Collins, Donovan, plus high-voltage numbers by Beck and Clapton, despite what American critics considered weak and unrehearsed. Jeff Beck's career was at a crossroads, not chasing hits, but chasing sound. He hadn't released any new music since 1980's There and Back, which he toured that year through 39 dates across the United States and Japan, and those dark months when the rock world was still dealing with the losses of John Bonham and later John Lennon. Despite the infectiously catchy songs and the album's personnel, There and Back became Beck's lowest charting solo release up to that point. Some rock historians suggest his partnership with keyboard wizard Jan Hammer may have been a double-edged sword in the public's perception, as the record felt almost like a sequel to 1977's Live with the Jan Hammer Group. One thing's for sure, the opening number Star Cycle hinted at Hammer's near future of career-defining success with Miami Vice.
But now, according to this poster behind us, you are about to...
That's basically to let everybody know that I'm not dead.
You hardly ever play, but in fact you have done quite a big tour abroad. Was that a comment?
1982 passed with no official concert activity at all. A new album was still a couple of years away, so for the time being, the A.R.M.S show offered Beck something different, a return to the stage alongside all friends for a cause that mattered. With both Jeff and Eric ready for the A.R.M.S show, the lineup suddenly carried a strong Yardbirds aura. The third spot seemed obvious. Jimmy Page's name quickly entered the equation, with this being his technically first benefit show ever. He had made a surprising guest appearance at Jeff Beck's Hammersmith Odeon show in March 1981, and the bootleg recording proves the crowd loved every second of it. Page had also shared the stage with Robert Plant at a Foreigner show in Munich in May 1982, but beyond that, there had been no full concert activity from Page since Led Zeppelin's final show in July 1980. Jimmy's fragile state was concerning for many around him. He'd been here before, say in the late 70s, but the new decade found him in a foggy state of depression, grief, and personal lifestyle choices that made his existence a man living on borrowed time. While Clapton enjoyed great success and Beck was exploring, Page was simply trying to find his footing again as a live performer. He kept himself busy though at his recently acquired Soul Studios, working on the Death Wish 2 soundtrack and preparing his former band's final album Coda. If you want a deeper look into Jimmy's life during this period, you can check out my 3-part series on Coda here on the channel. Clapton, Beck and Page joining forces for the A.R.M.S show was historic. They shared similar paths, a full circle back to the Yardbirds, a band they were all a part of at different stages. Eric was a powerhouse on the first lineup 1963 through 1965. Beck came in next as lead guitarist until midway through 1966, when Page arrived as bass player, months later full-time guitarist next to Jeff. Beck left the band, or so they say.
Somebody told me I should be proud tonight, but I'm not, because they kicked me out. They did. That's right. Damn.
Page carried on. The Yardbirds split in 1968 and the new Yardbirds were born. Although Page, Beck and Clapton never shared the stage in the 1970s, there were several archive vinyl releases throughout the decade, starting with a Live Yardbirds collection, followed by Guitar Boogie, and a 1973 title both comprised of 1965 rehearsal tapes Page and Clapton recorded in pure fun, later rebranded by the record label with overdubs by members from the Rolling Stones. The A.R.M.S show 1983 felt like a long-lasting wish granted, a pending item in British rock, to have all three Yardbird heroes showcasing their skills and forever impact in modern music. Some skeptics still wondered if the lineup would work. Playing Royal Albert Hall was a record book moment for the former Yardbirds. None of them had ever performed there as solo artists. Clapton hadn't played the venue since December 1969 with Delaney and Bonnie and Friends. Jeff Beck last appeared there in September 1966 with the Yardbirds, including Jimmy Page on bass. And Page himself had not returned to the Albert Hall since January 1970 with Led Zeppelin. British press ran different articles on the upcoming meeting of rock and roll giants to raise awareness and funds for multiple sclerosis. Such was the hype that an ad-lib piece by Peter Holt confirmed a second date for the A.R.M.S show at the Prince Trust on September 21st. It seemed there was no way the star-studded lineup would only do one show in London. Both nights were sold out by the first week of September 1983, a month that would see Black Sabbath release the underrated gem Born Again, while Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow technically called it a day in the studio with Bent Out of Shape. According to Jimmy Page's anthology book, he was nervous during the A.R.M.S rehearsals, realizing that unlike his pals, he didn't have a solo career. Page didn't feel comfortable doing a Zeppelin-only set, so he chose 2 cuts from his Death Wish 2 soundtrack, plus a song he had to play for fans. A September 19th ensemble photo was published on London's Daily Mirror. A supergroup it was. Tuesday, September 20th, 1983. The A.R.M.S concert was shot on video for a later VHS release, yet some songs were cut for time constraints. You can find available bootlegs with a complete show. Eric Clapton took the stage first with a 7-man band. The music, attire, and performance reflected Clapton's career in '83. Well-rehearsed, well-dressed, extremely confident, yet relaxed. He had the right elements for opener, tight but loose. The band featured Chris Staten on keyboards. His work appeared in several Joe Cocker albums, and he was in Clapton's band since 1980. The great Steve Winwood on keyboards of Spencer Davis Group, Traffic, and short-lived Blind Faith fame with Clapton. Drummer Kenny Jones had been Ronnie Lane's bandmate in The Faces, and he filled in for Keith Moon's tragic passing in The Who since 1978. Percussion was played by the passionate skills of Ray Cooper. He'd done many sessions for Elton John, The Stones, and Pink Floyd's Final Cut.
Ray Cooper, he's gonna steal the show!
The pocket-playing Rolling Stones duo of Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman carried the music on stage. They just completed recording for the soon-to-be-released Undercover. Talented session man Andy Fairweather Lowe completed the lineup on guitar and vocals. Clapton's set had 1 track from his new album, plus 1981's Rita May, 3 cuts from Slow Hand 1977, plus 2 medley numbers. Session keyboard player James Hooker was called in for the next part of the show. Steve Winwood played a lead singer's set of 6 songs, including Slow Down Sundown from 1980's Ark of a Diver, and the Spencer Davis hit Give Me Some Lovin', of course. One of England's most recognizable voices, it was only natural to give him a personal showcase. The Winwood effect was a couple of years away from storming the charts. His formula became something many of his peers tried to emulate.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Jeff Beck followed with the groovacious control of Simon Phillips on drums. Bass player wizard duties were handled by Fernando Saunders from the Jan Hammer Group. Keyboard textures and sequencers were played by composer Tony Hymas. Jeff Beck's set featured 2 songs from There and Back, 2 from Wired, a feature hit, People Get Ready with Andy Fairweather Lowe on vocals, and Beck singing Hi-Ho Silver Lining. Electric guitar inventions, his Fender Stratocaster Sunburst was a masterclass in movement, as the maestro underlined why he remains one of the greatest guitarists of all time. Screaming strings of vital phrasing substance, the rebel with a cause, a creative bridge between blues and jazz, El Becco. Jimmy Page was next with a dramatic opening using the Albert Hall's in-house organ for his spellbinding take on Chopin's Prelude off the Death Wish 2 album soundtrack. Unlike Clapton and Beck, Jimmy's set felt like an event inside an event. It was a perfect vehicle that summarized his current life battles and the questions for the new decade. His image echoed some of George Harrison and Page's outfit during Led Zeppelin's last concert tour, more specifically Hanover, June 24th, 1980. Smoking a cigarette, the definition of cool, a mystery figure rising to the occasion like the guitar hero he was. The fact he didn't use his accustomed Les Paul, but the Telecaster with the beat-bender mechanism was a smart choice, a reinvention of sorts, carrying the fire from Led Zeppelin's latter-day period energy, a timeless piece that stole the thunder that evening. More Death Wish 2 live debuts followed with Who's to Blame and City Sirens featuring Steve Winwood on vocals. Page didn't bring any musicians because he wasn't a solo artist, and how could he, right? Jimmy used a mixed personnel from the previous sets. Despite the long time away from a full concert, Page displayed his signature flow, the mannerisms, pose, conviction. You could tell everyone was thrilled to enjoy this historic performance. Closing set piece had Page reach out for the famous EDS 1275 double neck, not used on stage since July 1980. There it was, and the crowd could guess what the song would be. The instrumental take on Stairway to Heaven was brilliant, a song Page had not performed in London since 1975. Having no vocals was a fitting tribute, a poetic statement, all while keyboard players adjusted to Jimmy's slightly quick tempo jitters. He had to be nervous, but at the same time he was grateful to be there. This was not Led Zeppelin, but the intention was there. Page's chops went stuntman, taking on the task with no second thoughts. The All-Star Jam closed the evening with every musician on stage in full British rock and roll empire mode, and Bill Wyman making the most of his cigarette. Some people say he looked like Jimmy Page from a distance. A historic rendition of Layla had Clapton, Page, and Beck rocking to the iconic track. Fiery guitar solos, rhythm section wisdom, former Yardbirds, and for a moment, the 80s Yardbirds. Jimmy's lead passages on the slow section were a celebration, while crazy man Ray Cooper hit the gong John Bonham style. Ronnie Lane addressed the crowd, a giant among legends, a legend himself, a man of gratitude, battling multiple sclerosis. Music was a momentary healer, all of them messengers of hope. Show number 2 took place on September 21st with a pretty much carbon copy setlist. Next day news articles feature a photograph of Princess Diana meeting some of the musicians at the Albert Hall Gala. The show raised some £45,000. Prince Charles spoke to Ronnie Lane about his ongoing condition. Quote, "The prince asked me about the decompression chamber for multiple sclerosis, which we're going to buy with last night's money, and asked me if I had ever used one. I told him I would not be standing here otherwise." The A.R.M.S show overall success and reviews spawned the idea of taking the concert on the road, the destination, America. Stay tuned for episode 2, as we'll dive deep into a forgotten tour of sold-out venues, personnel changes, on-stage surprises, and more. It's A.R.M.S 1983, Part 2.
We trust you enjoyed this very, very exciting show. A one-off occasion. Let's hope it happens again sometime soon. Let us now say goodnight to the Prince and Princess of Wales.